welcome to part 77 in my build log series of the Trumpeter 1:200 scale model of the Titanic. Now today I am fitting ladders all over the model. Now there's quite a few places, particularly on the superstructure, but also on the forward and aft well decks, where ladders were used to get up and down from different decks and so on and so on. And up to now I've been fairly sparing on how I've added ladders because they're fairly delicate parts and there's a fine line between adding things and making the model look pretty early, but then running the risk of things being damaged. So I've left the ladders till quite late on in the build. But we're now at a point where really all I'm doing is adding fine detail. So today is the day when all the ladders get fitted onto the model. So by the end of the video, hopefully, they should all be on. Now, there are discrepancies between Titanic and Olympic and a few other things on where ladders should be. So if you see something I've done wrong, or if you see somewhere where you think there should be a ladder and I haven't put one, let me know in the comments and I'll do some research and see what I think. But please do, if you think I've made a mistake, get in touch, give me a shout, because that's one of the very useful things about having a YouTube channel. The other thing I'm going to do today is a float test. So this is something that a lot of people have asked for over the last weeks and months, and for various reasons, and I'll explain those reasons when we get to the float test, but for various reasons I've not been able to do one. So today's the day we will pop the ship, in the water, and we will see how she performs. Hopefully well. It's always a bit of a worry when you do this for the first time in a while, but should be fine. So, all that to look forward to. Without any further ado, let's crack on. Now then, the next set of ladders I'm adding are these ones here. And immediately I can hear people saying, what the hell is he doing? What's he been on this evening? Well, incidentally, the answer is some salmon. But why have I added ladders here when clearly there were stairs? We know there were stairs here because there are photos galore of Titanic and Olympic, and incidentally Britannic, showing stairs in this area leading down into the well deck. And there was also stairs here leading up onto B deck, and just for the record, there were also stairs going up onto the poop deck. And yet there were ladders underneath these stairs in all locations. Now, why? Well, the answer lies in practicality. The stairs that could be fitted there were made from teak, and they were perfectly decent stairs, perfectly serviceable. They had metal handrails and so on, but they were fitted largely for convenience. It's much easier to climb up a set of stairs than it is to climb up a ladder. But they were quite vulnerable. This is about the lowest open area of the ship. As you can see, the waterline is down there. So we are as low as it's possible to be on an open deck in this location. And the stairs were, albeit perfectly well built, quite a vulnerable piece of equipment. If a wave came over the side, or even if you got quite a large amount of spray or something, there's a lot of surface area on a set of stairs. And the danger is, of course, they could get ripped away. And of course, once they've been ripped away, they then pose a danger to the rest of the ship. They can smash into other things, they can break windows, they can seriously hurt people. So these stairs were designed to be removed. Now, I've heard conflicting opinions on when these stairs were removed. I've heard some people say that the stairs were only added when the ship was at port, because that was when you needed a decent amount of thoroughfare of people going up onto the forecastle, taking ropes down, so on and so on. And that could very well be true, but I have seen photos of Olympic at sea, mid-Atlantic, with those stairs in place. So I'm not entirely sure what the rule was on having these stairs there. But whatever the rule was, my model will show stairs there. But whether stairs were there or not, you always need a way of getting up from the well deck onto the forecastle deck, and similarly you need a way of getting up from the well deck onto the poop deck as well. So if the stairs were removed, there were always ladders permanently fixed in place to facilitate access onto these decks. And of course, a ladder has far less surface area than a set of stairs, so it's very well suited to being a permanent fixture there. So when the stairs weren't there, crew and officers would simply use those ladders to get onto the deck. Now, please correct me if you know I'm wrong, but My suspicion is that these were only in areas where there wasn't another means of access onto the deck above. So there would have been a ladder there, and there would have been a ladder there. There would also have been a ladder here, and there would have been ladders here and here leading up onto the poop deck. However, the area that I suspect there weren't ladders is here. So you can't see at the moment because of course the superstructure isn't attached, but there would be a set of stairs coming down, or I think here, going down onto the well deck. But you don't really need a ladder there, because in order to get up to the next deck, all you've got to do is go through this door, into the second class entrance, up a set of stairs, and you're onto the next deck. So I'm not, unless anyone shouts out and corrects me, I'm not going to fit a ladder there. Now, I've rather worked myself into a bit of a corner here, because of course there was a ladder there, but it's very difficult to get in because the cranes and everything are in the way. Anyway, I've managed to get it in place with the help of some blue tack and a few other bits and pieces, a small amount of asking nicely and so on. So we shall attempt to glue that in place now. It's not very visible, but you know the policy. Which is, of course, if it's visible at all, I do try to include it. So there we go. Now, somebody the other day was asking me about my glue spreaders. And they are not in any way sophisticated pieces of kit. It's also worth saying they weren't my idea. I would say fully 2 years ago now, one of the viewers of this channel dropped me a message and gave me this idea. He said, why don't you use these things? They're a very good idea. So they're not my idea. But these are made up of sewing needles. So you can see on this one, I've bent the actual needle, and you can see that I've also snapped off where the eye used to be. On this one, you can see that the needle's actually still whole, and you can see that the eye is there. But it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you end up with this sort of prong. In the case of this one, it's like that. In the case of this one, it's more like that. But basically, when you dip them into the glue, there's enough surface tension in the glue just to hold a very, very small quantity of glue in that small area. And then you just wipe it on, dab it, whatever, and that's how you apply the glue. Just to hold them, just to hold the needles, stop me from stabbing myself and so on. What I've done is I've got 2 planks of mahogany, glued them together, drilled a hole, and then I've glued the needle into that bit of wood. And that's it. And on both of these, I've put a bend in so that I can sort of manipulate the tool a bit more easily. I find that easier than having a straight needle. But they're really not very sophisticated bits of kit, but they're a very good example of something which is far better than anything I've ever found in a shop. You know, they're robust, they're reliable. When they get clagged up, over time, of course, glue builds up on these things, and they just end up growing and growing and growing. They end up looking like a stalactite. You can just hold them under a flame, and the flame burns away all of the glue, strips it right back to bare metal, and you're ready to go again. So, that's my glue spreaders. Now, just to address a question that I'm sure I'll get at some point, where do these ladders come from? Well, there are various sets online that you can buy photo etch ladders from. Some of them have been designed for this kit, some are just modelling odds and sods, but I got these from the actual Trumpeter kit itself. So the Trumpeter kit comes with sets of photo etch, this stuff, and I think there's about 6 or 7 sets of photo etch in the Trumpeter kit. Now, of course, because I have the KA set, I have not used any of that photo etch at all. So all I've done is I've gone in and found the ladders from that set, and I've glued them into the model and used them here. So I'm quite fortunate in that I have a different set, so I've got spare ladders. If you don't have a spare set, as I say, there are various different photo etch sets you can buy online, and they all will have additional ladders in. Now, just finishing off this ladder here, I've already glued the top onto the poop deck itself, which is why it's being held in place without any blue tack or anything. What I tend to do is I glue one end of it whilst it's being held with blue tack. Then I remove the blue tack and do the other end. So I'm now just going to glue the bottom. These are a little bit more tricky as they sort of float in mid-air. All the ones at the front of the ship sit on a wall. These ones float, so it's that little bit harder to make sure that they're exactly perpendicular to the deck, and of course that's really important that they are. So I'll just adjust the angle now so you can get a better view. There we go, you see. Camera's struggling to pick it up because it's a bit dark in here, but that is, I promise you, a ladder in situ. So, final ladder, and as you can see, the giant blob of blue tack is holding it in place at the bottom, and that allows me to get the top glued. Now, because these are quite vulnerable, and also because there's going to be a stair that goes over the top of them, I'm being reasonably liberal with glue. Because, as I say, I think they are quite exposed here. So better, I think, to add a little bit more glue, particularly in an area where they're not going to be that visible. And then hopefully that should give me a bit more insurance against things coming loose later. So I'll let that dry off, let the glue cure, then I'll remove the blue tack and paint the lower section, and that'll be us. Okay, it's about 5 minutes later. I'm assuming the glue will have dried by now. And sure enough, it has. It's always promising when you pull the blue tack away and the bottom of the ladder bends, but the top stays absolutely fixed in place. Shows you've got a nice, reliable bond. There we go. That should be enough at the bottom. So we'll just let that dry again, and then that should be us done. So here we go, another float test. And apologies for the delay on this. I know this is something that people have been asking me to do for absolutely ages, and I appreciate that. So the reason I haven't done one for a long time is, firstly, I didn't really see any value in it. You know, the weight of the model hadn't changed significantly since I last did one, so I didn't feel like I would gain much from it. But in addition to that, the summer we had here in the UK was exceptionally hot. And because of that, there was a hosepipe ban in my area. And so that was only lifted right at the, I think it was about the end of November. And I didn't really feel that I could, in all good conscience, fill a bath almost to the brim just for the purpose of sailing a model boat. That felt like a fairly poor use of water. So that's the reason for the delay. But anyway, we're here now, and we're looking pretty good. I think the bow still needs a wee bit more ballast. I mean, you can see quite clearly we're a little bit high out of the water at the bow. But as we get to amidships, we've still got a few millimetres to go. And as you can see, the stern is actually sitting a little bit deeper in the water. You can just see out there by the rudder. Sorry, I'm struggling to get the angle here, but as you can see, just there by the rudder, we're looking pretty good, actually. So I'm still relatively happy with this. She floats pretty well, and you know, she's relatively stable. Perhaps not quite as stable as I'd like, and I'll go on to that in just a sec. But she's, you know, she looks pretty good in the water for the sort of, for the amount of detail that's on this and for the amount of weight I have in the superstructure. I'm pretty happy with how she floats, to be honest. So here we go, and here's just a few close-ups of the model, and I've tried to get sort of closer to the waterline here, just because that really exaggerates or makes it much clearer where the waterline actually sits on the model. So hopefully that shows that pretty well. Now, incidentally, something that I think is just worth bringing up, because it's something that potentially quite a few people might just come across when they're doing their model, if you're doing a radio controlled model, that is. If you intend to sail your model in fresh water and you have weighted it such that it is pretty much the same as Titanic, note that it will float slightly lower in the water than the original Titanic did. And the reason for that, of course, is that fresh water is less dense than salty water. Salt water, seawater, has minerals, salts dissolved in it. So a litre of seawater actually weighs more than a litre of fresh water. So a ship in fresh water has to displace more water in order to gain the upthrust it needs to remain afloat. So your model will sit lower in the water. Now, in the case of this model, that equates to, I don't know, a couple of millimetres, so it's fairly insubstantial, but nonetheless, it's, you know, just something that's worth bearing in mind, and it's also quite an interesting little point. So, there you go. The model still floats pretty well under its own volition in the bath. Happy days. And to be honest, though, that shouldn't really be a surprise, because throughout building this, I have worked to try to keep the model as close as possible to Titanic's original weighting. So my hull, for example, is very, very similar weight to what you'd expect on the real ship. You know, I've sort of tried as best as possible to use ballast and place components carefully enough that you recreate where boilers would have weighed with the model down, where coal bunkers would have been, where engines would have been, so on and so on. Now, the area in which my model is heavier than I would like is the superstructure. And the reason for that is because I've been exceptionally lucky, really, with this entire project, because my channel has become really quite popular. I've been very lucky in that manufacturers have sent me components and such to review. So, you know, you've had things like China 3D, I've had stuff photo etch from Neil over at Woodies Modelworks, I've had a whole bunch of stuff. And this is certainly not a complaint, because they have added to the model and allowed me to build a ship which is miles better than I could ever possibly have hoped to build without these things. So, you know, I am and will remain eternally grateful for that stuff, because it's just improved the model no end. What it has done, though, is it has tempted me into adding more weight into the superstructure. Not a catastrophic amount more weight, because you see, you know, the model still balances, so she's still relatively stable. But the superstructure now is heavier than I had planned, and it is certainly heavier than the Titanic superstructure would have been. And I'm conscious that the model now is very detailed and very delicate. And don't be concerned, this is not me saying I'm not going to sail the model. I am. But I'm going to take a few steps to make sure it is as safe as it can possibly be, because having a heavier superstructure has eroded some of the stability that I really had hoped my model would have. And of course, the thing to bear in mind as well is that having the model floating just happily in a bath is not very representative to having the model floating in the real world. Because of course, you know, a boating lake has far more hazards than the bath. The water is absolutely flat, it's like a mill pond. In a boating lake, it's not. In the boating lake, you've got the wind and so on. And, you know, this is one of those things I come back to quite a lot when I talk about models. You know, that a model is 1 to 200 or whatever, but it's scaled down. whereas the real world around it remains as it was. So a 20-mile-an-hour wind will be in equivalent 200 times stronger to my model than it would have been to the real Titanic. Any waves or ripples you get on the boating lake, you need to times them by 200 to get the equivalent size that you would have had on Titanic itself. So it's a relatively hostile environment, and having that slightly heavier superstructure just makes me a little bit nervous. You know, if I were to have a particularly strong gust of wind, or if someone came by in a rowing boat and created a relatively sizable wave that hit the model broadside, I would be a little bit worried that she might keel over further than I'd like. And of course, the real danger there is that she could capsize. I don't think it's likely, because with the model as it is at the moment, I can tilt it to about 25 degrees and she can still retain her stability perfectly fine. So, I mean, that's a pretty severe list. But nonetheless, this is a model that, you know, it's taken me a hell of a long time. A huge amount of my own personal money's gone into it, and a huge amount of my time's gone into it. You know, I have a huge amount of affection for the model now. So I want to take a few steps to do my best to ensure something won't go wrong when it's on the boating lake. Obviously, you can't immunise yourself from this entirely, but hopefully the things I'm going to do will protect the model as best as possible. So first and foremost, and logically, I'm only going to sail it on a calm, clear day. So sun's shining, hopefully not too much wind, hopefully not too many ripples on the lake. That's the kind of day I'm going to sail it. I'm not going to sail it on a horrible, blustery, wintry day. Fairly commonsensical, I hope. The second thing I'm going to do, and I don't think this will be very popular, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be very visible. But the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fit a keel. And I'll show that in just a moment in the bath. But the idea of a keel is you're just suspending a bit of weight below the level of the hull, and it just massively increases the stability. Now, as I say, I don't really think the ship needs it. I think she should be stable enough without one. But it's just that sort of insurance policy. You know, if the worst comes to the worst, the keel will give the ship far more stability than I could ever achieve without it. So it's really just an insurance thing, but it's one of those things that I think I'm tempted to add on the basis that I think without the keel, I will be worried about sailing the model. With the keel, I will hopefully be able to enjoy sailing the model. So in that sense, it's worth it. Now, I know people are going to be a bit annoyed, or they're not going to like the idea because the Titanic didn't have a keel originally, but I mean, you know, there's lots of things the Titanic didn't have. She didn't have LED lighting like mine does. She wasn't powered by lead acid batteries like mine was. She wasn't made of plastic like mine is. You know, if you go far enough, you can end up down a right rabbit hole about this sort of thing. So I'm not too concerned about it. And I think really, you know, the lake water is pretty murky really, so I don't think you'll see it very much. So anyway, that's the plan. So I've made the keel already, and I made it on the 3D printer, so I'll show that. And I cast a lead weight for it yesterday, so I'll show you the 3D print, and then we'll show the model floating with the keel in the bath, and we'll, you know, see how stable it is. And that'll be the end of the video. So there we go. So with that in mind, here she is once again in the water. And doesn't she look fine? As you can see, obviously you can see the keel. The few things I'd ask you to bear in mind though is firstly, this is clear water in a white bath on an open boating lake. I honestly don't think you'll see it. And of course, as you can see exactly what I mean. The stability now, absolutely fantastic. She rolls, but the real Titanic rolled. But she rights herself, and I mean, I am putting an enormous amount of force to make her list by about 5 degrees. So I am really happy with this solution, and more importantly, this solution makes me feel far more comfortable about putting what is an extremely delicate piece of work, and something that I now feel very affectionate about, into a fairly hostile environment. So that is it. That is the float test, and I mean, to be fair, without really doing any huge science on it, other than getting the weight of the keel correct, the waterline's actually pretty much spot on, which is, well, these these things rarely happen the way you expect them first time round, so that's actually very good. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. So, that is the situation as we currently find ourselves in. So I will leave you now with a few shots of the model sitting on the water, because she does look really nice on the water. There's something about you get a different view of the model, I think, when she's actually afloat, which is really quite satisfying. So I'll leave you with a few shots of that, and I will see you in the next one. If you've got any questions, comments, pop them down below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Do let me know what you think about the keel. What I'd ask is just bear in mind that this is, as I say, a fairly delicate piece of equipment now. So the rationale behind the keel is, as I say, it's a sort of insurance policy more than anything, but something which I do feel is necessary, and it's something that ultimately will allow me to enjoy sailing the model rather than being worried about it. So, as I say, questions, comments, pop them down below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you have enjoyed this, do please like and or subscribe, and to be honest, if you haven't enjoyed it, why not like and subscribe as well? I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.